Hello, and welcome to End or N-Gauge Model Railway. I'm Jonathan. A few months ago, I decided to buy a Dapol Class 27 and made a video about fitting DCC to it, but there was a running problem that I didn't talk about. The first thing I did with the model was scan its instructions. As expected, the standard running in on DC was recommended, so I got started on that. To my delight, the motor seemed to be very smooth and quiet right from the start. But very early into the running in, it started to derail at a particular place. It would make it all the way around the first curve, but then derail at the start of the second one. For a model railway, these curves aren't particularly tight, and this was on the outer curve, so I was a little confused. None of my other locos had derailing issues. I ran the loco a few times, and it was consistent in its derailment. It must be that a small part of this curve has a tighter radius. It's flexi-track, so it must be that I haven't laid it perfectly consistently. I ran the loco the other way around the loop, and also turned the loco so it was facing the other way and ran it. The problem was only in this part of the track, and only if the end of the loco with the round roof grille was the leading end. I took it off the track and tried moving the bogie of that end by hand, and found that it was catching on the hook from the buffer beam. The bogie at the other end could move freely. Looking closely at both ends, I could see that one hook came down lower than the other, so I think it wasn't assembled properly in the factory. I tentatively gave it a bit of a nudge with some tweezers, worried that I might snap it off, but happily it stayed attached and moved up enough to give the bogie the clearance that it needed. After that, it didn't have any running issues. It completed its running in on DC and was fine after fitting DCC. Admittedly, it didn't see a lot of action over the following months. This video was intended as a catch-up on a topic that I haven't wanted to include in other videos, but which was in danger of disappearing into the distant past. Up until this point, footage and photos were from a few months ago. I wanted to add some footage showing it running nicely with the train. For its size, this loco feels like it's got some reasonable weight, so I thought I'd see how it managed with my train of 13 JHA wagons. I finished improving the rolling quality of these wagons, which I'll cover in a different video, but together they're still quite a heavy train. At a moderate speed of 6 or 7 out of 28, the loco manages the train, seemingly without any trouble. I decided to run the loco the other way around too. I cranked up the speed to 14 out of 28. It was noticeably faster, so the loco wasn't at its pulling limit at the lower speed, but to my shock it started derailing again, hence the abrupt stop here. I say derailing again, but this is the end that was okay originally. I wondered if it was a one-off, so sent the train around a couple more times, but it kept derailing at its old favourite place. I ran the loco light and it made it round the curves. I didn't notice at the time, but in the video you can see the body lurch as the loco comes into the curve. I ran it again, just to be sure. It stayed on the track again, but as before, it does a lurch that I didn't notice live, but which is clear in this footage. I put it back onto the train. It started derailing again. Consistently. So, this is a new factor. It behaves differently under heavy load. After my original fix, it had happily pulled trains of coaches or 5-plank wagons around on multiple occasions, but those trains wouldn't have been nearly as heavy as this JHA rake. I turned the loco around so that the end with the round roof grille is leading. This was the end that I fixed a few months ago. No problem. Since it was working okay this way around, I then cranked it up to full power. This is now an express freight service of empty wagons. It doesn't seem like the loco is having any trouble with the weight of the train. At this point, I wondered how it would do on the tighter inner curve. In theory, the train should also be harder to pull around the tighter curves. It made it around, grille first, without problems. I turned the loco around again so that the troublesome end was leading. It made it around this curve okay, but it consistently came off the curve at the other end. Looking closely at the loco side on and gently rocking the loco back and forth with a bit of pressure on it, it seemed like the bogies had several millimeters of play in them. Presumably, a heavy load puts it into a bad place. And actually, looking back at footage from when it first pulled the JHAs, the lead-in bogie visibly shifts position when the loco takes up the weight of the train. Having had the issue with the hook at the other end, I was suspicious of the one on this end. The bogies pull out easily, but it's still tricky to get an angle where it's clear how much the hook comes down beyond the buffer beam. Once I managed to get the angle, it looked like the hook on the troublesome end came down slightly further. I didn't notice the hair caught on the body until reviewing the footage. I'll have to check that's not still there. This time, without the bogies attached, it was easy to gently push the hook up a bit with my nail, with much less risk of breaking it than with tweezers. Back on the track and a tentative run around with the wagons. Then another to be sure. Success! Just to be sure, I also ran it on the inner loop. It was fine. I'm most likely to have this loco pulling collet coaches. I don't think the real things would ever have been seen pulling modern heavy stone trains, but it's good to know the model's got decent pulling power. If I ever do a tally of locos that have had issues versus ones that haven't, then this one will have to go in the had issues category, but thankfully it was an easy fix and it's otherwise been very good. That's all for now. Bye bye.